The plantation house had learned how to keep secrets. It rose from the Georgia soil like a tired animal. White columns stained the color of old bone, shutters hanging at uneven angles, their paint peeled by decades of heat and silence. When Elias Crowder crossed the threshold in the summer of 1887, the air inside smelled of dust, iron, and something faintly medicinal, as if pain itself had once been stored in the walls. Elias was not a man who believed in ghosts. He believed in ledgers, contracts, and the reassuring logic of ownership. After disgrace in Boston and a reputation that followed him like a shadow, the plantation had seemed like an opportunity to start again. Cheap land, a forgotten name, a place where no one asked questions about who he had been. The locals, however, watched him with eyes that did not welcome beginnings. They stood near the road when his carriage arrived. Former servants, tenant farmers, men too quiet for their own good. No one waved, no one offered help. An old black woman near the gate lowered her gaze the moment Elias looked back at her, as if recognition itself were dangerous. Inside the house, time had collapsed into neglect. Furniture draped in sheets, portraits turned toward the wall, a grand staircase that creaked like a warning rather than an invitation. Elias instructed his clerk to inventory what could be sold and dismissed the man before dusk. He preferred to be alone. It was in the study that the first inconsistency revealed itself. The desk drawers were swollen with humidity, but intact. Inside them, Elias found account books bound in cracked leather, the handwriting meticulous, almost obsessive. Plantation owners were rarely subtle men, but this one had been precise. Dates, names, costs down to the penny. At first, Elias read out of idle curiosity. Wages, supplies, medical visits for workers, unusually frequent, unusually expensive. Then he noticed a name written repeatedly in the margins, never in the main columns. Samuel, no surname, no designation, just the name, appearing month after month. Elias searched the earlier volumes. In the records from 1879, Samuel appeared openly, listed as a child, expenses marked under domestic care. Then abruptly, in the spring of 1881, the name vanished from official entries. Yet the marginal notes continued. Payments for shoes in the correct size for a growing boy, food allowances that exceeded what the household required, and twice, payments to a local physician, discreetly logged under livestock treatment. Elias closed the book slowly. According to county records, the child named Samuel had disappeared that same year, lost near the river, presumed drowned. The matter had been settled quickly, without investigation. Accidents, especially involving servants' children, were rarely questioned. But ledgers did not lie easily. As night fell, Elias lit an oil lamp and continued reading. In a locked cabinet behind the desk he found letters, unsent, folded, but never sealed. They were written by the plantation's former mistress, her script trembling, uneven. He cannot be seen. They will destroy him if they know. Better the lie than the truth. The words were enough to tighten Elias's chest. Not because of sentiment, but because of pattern. Lies required maintenance. Silence required witnesses. A floorboard creaked behind him. Elias turned sharply, lamp raised, but the doorway was empty. The sound had come from the hallway, slow and deliberate, as if someone had shifted their weight and then thought better of entering. He told himself it was the house settling. Still, he locked the study door that night. The next morning, Elias rode into town to consult public records. The clerk at the courthouse was cordial until Elias mentioned the plantation's former owners. Then the man's smile stiffened. "Old business," the clerk said. "Nothing worth digging up." "And the missing child?" Elias asked. The clerk paused. His pen hovered above the page. "That boy," he said finally. "Best left where he is." "Where is that?" The clerk met Elias's eyes for the first time. "Gone," he replied. Same as he ever was. On the ride back, Elias felt the sensation again. Not fear, but certainty. The certainty that the land was not empty, that whatever had been hidden had not stayed buried out of obedience but out of patience. When he returned to the plantation, he found something new on his desk. One of the ledgers lay open to a page he had not marked. Next to the name Samuel, Written in a hand that was not the former owner's was a single sentence. Some children are only declared missing. Elias stared at the words until the lamp flickered. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, something moved. Not quickly, not loudly, but with purpose. And for the first time since purchasing the land, Elias understood that the plantation had accepted him not as an owner, but as a participant. The second night brought rain, thick and relentless, drumming against the plantation roof like impatient fingers. Elias Crowder stood at the upstairs window, watching the yard dissolve into mud. Lantern light from the servants' quarters flickered in the distance, though he had given no instruction for anyone to remain. The presence unsettled him more than absence would have. By morning, he resolved to speak with those who had lived on the land long enough to remember. He began with Caleb Horn, a white tenant farmer whose family had worked the outer fields for decades. Horn greeted Elias with forced politeness, his posture stiff, his eyes constantly drifting toward the house. "Samuel?" Horn repeated when Elias asked. He laughed once, too sharply. "Plenty of Samuels around back then." "This one lived in the house," Elias said, "until 1881. The farmer's jaw tightened. "That weren't for folks like us to talk about." Elias pressed. He spoke of records, of payments, of lies that required upkeep. Horn's face flushed, then drained of color. "You best stop," Horn whispered. "That child brought trouble. Always did." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that don't wash out," Horn said, stepping back. "Some stains sink deep." The phrase followed Elias as he rode farther down the road, toward the cabins where former servants and their descendants still lived. Many refused to speak. Doors closed quietly. Eyes turned away. But an elderly black man named Isaiah Reed finally invited Elias onto his porch. Isaiah moved slowly, his body bent by years of labor. His voice, however, was steady. "They said the boy drowned," Isaiah said, gazing into the distance. "But rivers don't return shoes." Elias leaned forward. "You saw him after?" Isaiah nodded once. "Not with my eyes, with my ears. Crying at night sometimes, like he was calling someone who couldn't answer." "Where?" Isaiah hesitated. "You don't want to know where." Elias did. That evening he returned to the plantation with a growing sense of danger. The house felt different now, less abandoned, more watchful. He went back to the study, opening drawers and cabinets with new urgency. Behind the fireplace he found a loose brick. Inside the narrow cavity was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Elias unfolded it carefully. A child's shirt, linen, hand-stitched, and beneath it a lock of dark hair tied with a faded blue ribbon. There was also a note, brittle with age. He must stay hidden until it is safe. If anyone asks, he was never here. Elias felt the weight of the lie settle fully onto him. This had not been neglect. It had been design. That night footsteps echoed again in the hallway. This time they did not retreat. Elias opened the door to find a young black woman standing rigid in the lamplight. Her name, she said, was Clara Reed, Isaiah's granddaughter. "You shouldn't be asking questions," she said softly. "They notice." "Who?" Elias asked. Clara's eyes flicked toward the walls. "Everyone who still owes something to this place." She told him what others would not. That Samuel had been lighter-skinned than the other children, that the mistress had favored him openly, that the master had once beaten a man nearly to death for whispering the wrong conclusion. "And after he drowned?" Elias asked. Clara swallowed. "Some nights he slept under the house, other nights, elsewhere." "Until when?" "Until he was old enough to be dangerous," she replied. Before Elias could ask more, Clara stiffened. Hoofbeats sounded outside. A man's voice called her name. She left without another word. The next day, Elias found a warning nailed to the front gate. No signature, just 3 words carved deep into the wood. "Let the dead rest." But Elias was past rest. He ordered the cellar opened, a space long sealed. The air that rushed out smelled of mold and rust, and something unmistakably human. At the far end, behind a false wall, he found scratches, tallies, names carved by an unsteady hand, and among them, larger than the rest, "Samuel lives." Above it, etched later with more force. Not for long. Elias stepped back as the truth finally sharpened into something lethal. The child had not vanished. He had been contained. As Elias turned to leave, he heard the sound again. Not footsteps this time, but breath. Close. Measured. Someone was standing behind the wall, waiting. The sound of breathing did not follow Elias Crowder out of the cellar. That somehow unsettled him more than pursuit would have. He sealed the false wall again before dawn, his hands trembling despite the Georgia heat. Whatever had been hidden there was not meant to be disturbed, not because it was dangerous to the living, but because it implicated them. The plantation thrived on shared guilt. Elias was beginning to understand that. By morning, word had spread. He noticed it in small ways. A delivery delayed without explanation, a pair of riders who slowed when passing the gate, eyes lingering too long on the house. The community that had ignored the plantation for years now seemed keenly aware of its new owner's movements. Elias rode into town again, this time with purpose sharpened into resolve. He sought out the church records, knowing that births and deaths often lived there longer than in any courthouse. The pastor, a thin man with a polished voice, greeted him warmly, until Elias asked about Samuel. "There is no such record," the pastor said after a pause that stretched too long. "Some names were never formally entered." Elias placed one of the letters on the desk. The pastor did not touch it. "This handwriting belongs to the former mistress," Elias said. "She attended your services. She confessed here." The pastor exhaled slowly. "Confession is not the same as truth, or it is too close to it," Elias replied. That night, Elias returned to the plantation and locked himself in the study. He laid out everything he had found: ledgers, letters, scraps of cloth, arranging them like pieces of a body reassembled too late. One detail refused to stay quiet: the medical payments. Elias wrote at first light to the physician listed in the records, or rather to what remained of his practice. The building was abandoned, windows boarded. A neighbor informed Elias the doctor had left town abruptly in 1883. After a disagreement, the woman added, with the wrong family. Elias searched county land transfers next. He discovered a small parcel sold quietly the year Samuel drowned, a cabin listed as uninhabited. It sat less than a mile from the plantation, hidden by trees and deliberate neglect. He went there alone. The cabin door hung open. Inside, dust lay thick, but not undisturbed. Footprints marked the floor, recent, deliberate. In the corner, Elias found a crude bed, and beneath it a wooden box. Inside were more tallies. Years this time, not days. And names Elias recognized from the plantation records. They had been feeding someone, keeping someone alive. A sound outside froze him. Elias extinguished his lantern and listened. Two men spoke in hushed tones, their boots stopping just short of the doorway. "He shouldn't have gone digging," one said. "He owns the land," the other replied. "Doesn't mean he owns the past." Elias slipped out through the back, heart hammering. He returned to the plantation under cover of darkness, locking every door behind him. That night, sleep refused him. Memories of his own disgrace in Boston surfaced. Accusations, whispers, truths bent into something manageable. He had survived by leaving. Samuel had not been afforded that mercy. Near midnight, Elias heard a knock. Not loud, not demanding, careful. When he opened the door, Clara Reed stood there again. Her face was pale, her voice urgent. "They're meeting," she said. "Tonight. They think you know too much." "About Samuel?" Elias asked. Clara hesitated. "About what he became." She told Elias the final truth the others had protected. Samuel had grown. He had learned. And when he began to speak, to ask questions that threatened bloodlines and reputations, and they moved him again. Not to the cellar, not to the cabin. "Where, then?" Elias asked. Clara shook her head. Somewhere no one could claim him. Somewhere he could be forgotten without dying. Elias felt the shape of the lie collapse. The plantation was not the prison. It was the decoy. As Clara turned to leave, she whispered one last thing. He knows your name. Elias stood alone in the doorway, the night pressing close, understanding now that Samuel was no longer a child in hiding, but a man shaped by secrecy, sustained by betrayal. And if Samuel had survived this long, he had not been waiting to be found. He had been waiting to decide. The meeting took place without candles. Elias Crowder watched from the shadowed edge of the trees as men gathered in the clearing beyond the old cotton fields. Their silhouettes were familiar now. Landowners, shopkeepers, a deputy whose badge caught what little moonlight there was. Respectable faces by day, executors of silence by night. No prayers were spoken, no names said aloud. They talked in fragments, as if the truth might hear itself if fully formed. He stirred it up, one man muttered. Should have sold the land to someone who knew better, said another. We can't let it surface, not now, not ever. Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. The mystery had shed its skin. This was not about a missing child anymore. It was about inheritance, not of land, but of sin. He returned to the house before he was noticed, his mind racing ahead of his fear. If Samuel had been hidden away, moved like a problem from place to place, then records would exist. Not official ones, personal ones, confessions written in the language of guilt. He went to the attic. The space had been avoided for years. Trunks lay stacked like coffins, each marked with a family name. Elias pried open the largest. Inside were diaries wrapped in oilcloth, their pages warped but legible. The mistress's hand again. She wrote of love first, not romantic, but desperate. Of a child born into contradiction. Of a father whose power could not erase biology. Of a community that smiled while sharpening knives. They say the boy must disappear. They say it is mercy, but mercy does not require chains. Further in, the tone darkened. He is asking questions now. He is too tall to hide. They say a school up north. I know better. Elias's breath caught. A school up north was a euphemism, a place where inconvenient lives were sent to be erased politely. He cross-referenced dates, names, transfers. A pattern emerged. Funds redirected through church donations. Transportation costs mislabeled. A facility in South Carolina that had closed abruptly years later. He knew where Samuel had been taken. Elias did not sleep. He packed papers, letters, proof enough to break the story open, or get himself killed trying. Before dawn, Clara appeared at the servant's door, as if summoned by his decision. You're leaving, she said. I'm going to bring this to the authorities, Elias replied. Outside this county. Clara studied him. They'll call you a liar. Then I'll give them evidence. She hesitated, then nodded once. Then you should know. She told him what Isaiah had never said aloud. Samuel's mother had not been a servant. She had been kin, a cousin brought to the plantation after her own family died, white enough to pass until the child was born. Then suddenly, irrevocably marked. They didn't just hide Samuel, Clara said. They erased her too. Elias mounted his horse as the sun rose. He did not make it past the tree line. A rider blocked the road, then another. The deputy stepped forward, hand resting near his revolver. You're mistaken about a great many things, the deputy said calmly. Elias dismounted. I know exactly enough. The deputy smiled. Then you know this land doesn't forgive men who break its agreements. Elias reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for the letters. He held them up. You can't bury paper, he said. A shot rang out. The horse screamed and bolted. Elias fell hard into the dirt, the letters scattering like startled birds. He scrambled for them, pain flaring through his side. The men hesitated, not from mercy, but calculation. Then a new sound cut through the clearing. Boots, slow, unhurried. A man emerged from the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His face bore the marks of years lived under restraint. Scars not from labor but from discipline. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert, unafraid. Every man in the clearing went still. The deputy swallowed. You shouldn't be here. The man smiled faintly. I've always been here. He looked at Elias, recognition passing between them, not familiarity, but alignment. You found the papers, the man said. Elias nodded. "You're Samuel." "I was," he replied. "Now I'm what remains." The men shifted nervously. This was not how the past was meant to return. Standing, breathing, remembering. Samuel stepped closer, his voice low. "You spent years deciding whether I lived or died." He glanced at Elias. "Now it's your turn to decide what happens next." The weight of the moment pressed down like a held breath, and no one noticed the deputy's finger tightening on the trigger. The deputy fired. The shot tore through the morning air, sharp and final. Elias Crowder felt the impact before he heard the echo, a brutal force ripping through his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Pain flared white, then distant, as the world narrowed to boots, dust, and the sound of his own breath fighting to stay steady. Samuel did not flinch. Before the deputy could fire again, Samuel moved. Not with rage, not with haste, but with certainty. He closed the distance in 3 strides, struck the deputy's wrist, and the revolver fell uselessly into the grass. No one else raised a weapon. They stood frozen, trapped between what they had been and what now stood in front of them. "You had one chance," Samuel said quietly, "and you spent it years ago." The men backed away. One by one they retreated, not defeated, but exposed. There would be no more violence today, too many witnesses, too much truth already loose. Samuel knelt beside Elias. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said. Elias forced a breath. Someone had to stop pretending. Samuel lifted him carefully, supporting his weight as they moved toward the trees. No one followed. Elias survived. The bullet had passed cleanly through muscle. Painful, but not fatal. He recovered in a neighboring county far from the plantation, guarded by silence and the growing reach of his evidence. What followed was not justice in the way stories prefer. There was no public trial, no grand reckoning. Instead, there were resignations, sudden relocations. A church burned its old records in an accidental fire. Families quietly sold land that had been in their names for generations. And there were whispers about a man who had once been declared dead, now seen traveling north, about letters that reached newspapers but were never printed, about a plantation that could not keep its secrets anymore. Elias wrote everything down. He sent copies to 3 cities. He trusted no single authority. The story emerged in fragments, distorted, softened, but impossible to erase completely. The child who had drowned became a rumor that would not settle. The plantation was sold again within the year. No one wanted it. Samuel did not attend Elias's departure. Instead, he left a letter. "You gave the truth somewhere to stand. That is more than most men would do. Do not look for me again. Survival has taught me caution. But know this, what they feared was never my anger. It was my memory." Elias folded the letter carefully. He left the South before winter. Years later, travelers passing through rural Georgia would remark on the abandoned house with white columns and broken shutters. Some said lights still appeared in the windows. Others claimed to hear a man walking the halls at night, not searching, not haunting, but keeping watch. As for Samuel, no official record ever confirmed his fate. But in towns far from the plantation, people occasionally spoke of a tall man who worked under different names, who avoided churches and courthouses, who carried himself like someone who had learned too early how easily the world erased inconvenient lives. He never spoke of his childhood. He didn't need to. The lie had failed. And that, at last, was enough. If this story unsettled you, let us know in the comments what part stayed with you the most. Subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories that were never meant to surface. Share this video so these stories aren't buried again. And don't forget to leave a like. It helps these forgotten voices be heard.